Now we've been talking about Islam. We've been talking about, for example, the fact, is there a difference between radical Islam and moderate Islam?
I say there is.
Islam, religious Islam. But let's not, don't ask us, don't talk to us. Let's talk, well, you can talk to Rita because she's an expert, but let's go even one higher than Rita Panahi and let's talk to Mohammed Zuhdi Jasser. He is in America. He is the founder and CEO of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, and he has also set up the Muslim Reform Movement. Now, James and I were lucky to meet Zuhdi when he was out in Australia very recently, and we've got him now live from the States to have our chat. Welcome to Outsiders, Zuhdi Jasser. How are you?
It's great to be with you, Rowan. Thanks for having me back. And James and Rita, thanks for having me.
Where are you sitting now? You've got a fantastic backdrop there behind you. It looks very beautiful.
Thank you. We're based in Phoenix, Arizona. I live in Scottsdale and have been here for 20 years. I grew up in the North Midwest and served in the U.S. Navy for 11 years. So it's great to be here.
Now, Zuhdi, just tell us briefly your background. You're Syrian, your parents were Syrian, they came to the States. Tell us your background, your Muslim faith and your basic mission regarding Islam.
Yeah, in my book, A Battle for the Soul of Islam, I talk about how my parents escaped Syria, the Ba'athist fascists, in 1966 and sought political asylum in America. I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin and learned that I could practice my faith more freely in America, in the West, than I could in any so-called Muslim country, that ultimately Syria and other regimes in the Middle East were oppressive dictatorships that had no room for freedom or liberty, and that America's first liberty of religious freedom was where I could be the most Muslim, the most free, and most individual, and have a personal practice of faith. Then I went to the University of Wisconsin, went to the academic centers, and started to learn that there was another form of Islam, political Islam, that was part of the Muslim Brotherhood movements, part of Khomeinist movements, these large global movements that really, I think, transformed what it was to be Muslim into a theopolitical movement. I served 11 years in the Navy, learned from my parents that ultimately the Middle East was going to have to go through the same process that the West went through that created America, Australia, Britain, revolutions against theocracy.
What possibility is there? Because there are these brilliant and I'd say brave Muslim reformers in the Western world, but you're up against it. Not only is there enormous pushback from Islamists, but also from the liberal left who want to classify any discussion about this as Islamophobic. What are the chances that the religion can reform and modernise like Christianity has?
Well, Rita, that's exactly why I came to Australia, is until the West gets in the field, gets in the game of taking sides within the House of Islam, right now the establishment in the Muslim world is a mafia, be it the Qataris, the Turkish Erdogan neo-caliphate he's trying to set up in Turkey, or his neo-Ottoman desires, the Saudis, the Egyptian military government. While some of these might be our short-term allies, we really share no values with the establishment running those countries, and yet the people in the prisons, the people who were on the streets in the Arab awakening that nobody thought would ever happen, were actually more of our allies. So just as in the Cold War, what you talked about with the alliance with the left, now I call the red-green axis. And we see the red-green axis coming together in the UN in narratives against America, against the West, against Israel, and its obsession to prevent any type of lens on the humanitarian disasters happening inside Iran and Saudi Arabia and Egypt. So the future, I think, comes to us beginning to take sides within the House of Islam we have a declaration of our Muslim Reform Movement that is 2 pages that are principles that come from the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, and we say Muslims who follow this are on our side. Muslims who believe in Islamism, political Islam, are not our allies. They're our adversaries, and we should start to take sides like we did in the Cold War.
Absolutely.
James.
Dr. Jasser, that sounds excellent, and this idea of reform within Islam sounds like a very promising idea, but I'm concerned that given how much of Islamic reaction against the West comes from contact with the West, how is it that coming from the United States, coming from even the United Nations, which is seen as a Western creation, that won't wind up provoking actually more radicalism? I mean, I think of Sayyid Qutb, the Muslim Brotherhood theorist, who became so enraged by "Baby, It's Cold Outside" that he wound up becoming an Islamic radical when he was studying in the United States. So how do you square that circle?
Well, I would tell you, as a Muslim, I always know that apologetics don't work when you're talking about your faith. You can't lead from apologetics. Same thing with the West. We should not be leading from a point of defense. We defeated the Soviet communist socialist ideology by advancing liberty and free markets and what we were for, not what we were against. So we need to work with families like mine, the leaders in our Muslim reform movement like Ezra Nomani, Rahil Raza, Osama Hassan, Majid Nawaz, others that are working that believe in their identity. I call it the 3 I's: identity, ijtihad, and inspiration. Will we die for the countries that we live in? Do we believe in reform, or ijtihad in Arabic? And are we inspired to be free and against political Islam? The Islamists of ISIS and the Saudis and others use magazines like Inspire to inspire jihad. We need to work with Muslims that are inspired by liberty and aren't apologetic about being pro-Western or pro-Israel.
Zuhdi, tell us a bit about which verses of the Quran you would look at that need reforming. And we are told that there are verses, you know, saying go and kill the Jew who's hiding behind the tree or whatever it is. This sort of virulent anti-Semitism is obviously one area, but also, you know, very, as we were talking earlier, apostasy. There's a lot within Islam that we in the West find pretty hard to cope with. Rita's family are from Iran. They had a similar problems. What specifically in the Quran would you tackle if you could?
Well, the first thing I'd say is we need tough love. We can't give Muslims a break through this passive sort of bigotry of low expectations. Secondly, the specifics of reform, I would say it's not what the Prophet did in the 7th century, but what would he do if he were alive today? I believe he would say the passages that refer to war in which the Muslim tribes, Muslim military fought against atheists or pagan, or even the one about the Jewish, against the Jewish tribe, Banu Qurayza, that needs to be said. It only applied to that one battle and one time. And now we reject Islamic states, we reject jihad of an Islamic military, and embrace secular states, our secular identity, and then we can separate religion from history. We also need to talk about the passages in which women get half a vote. The Hudud penalty passages all need to be not rejected as not authentic, but said, you know what, it doesn't apply anymore. Because I would ask your audience, you know, do we hold Muslims accountable? There's a 7th century reality of what was happening at the time, but now we hold them accountable to 21st century realities, and we need to say, what should Muslims do today? Just as we apply modern science and everything, we should apply modern political science, and that's how you navigate interpreting older passages in a modern way. And last, quickly, the hadith, what you cited, kill a Jew behind every stone, that comes from hadith. So there are some hadith that can't be reformed. We just need to say that really wasn't the word of the Prophet. It was fabricated. And the passage from Hamas's doctrine that you just noted is actually, I believe, a fabrication. And most Muslims, I believe, accept that as a fabrication, but don't say it. They sit on their hands and are quiet.
Now, in your opinion, what Muslim majority nation has got it right, which has separated the theocracy from the law and is as a moderate secular nation?
Well, the fact, Rita, that you have to scratch your head to find it shows you what the problem is when you're talking about 1.6 billion people. But closest to your country is Indonesia. President Wahid, Abdurrahman Wahid, wrote a book called The Illusion of the Islamic State. And he said in the opening of his book, he said, you need to have a state of Islam in your heart, but we reject the Islamic State. Indonesia, in its constitution, separates mosque and state. Now, does it have corruption? Is it having...
They've got blasphemy laws. They've got the Aceh province where Sharia law is enforced in a brutal manner. So, and they've got all sorts of other sort of backward notions in the treatment of women. So, again, if we're holding them up to Western standards, they don't really get a pass mark, do they?
Oh, you're exactly right. That's why, just like, I'm a free market guy and I see socialism creeping into the West all the time. Yeah, they might have the foundations of a separation of mosque and state, but the Wahhabi petro-Islamic influence from the Gulf and the fact that they've not created a new modern 21st century Sharia school of thought has allowed that vacuum to be filled by Salafi jihadi interpretations where the mayor of some of their largest cities is put in jail because he's Christian, because he blasphemes, etc. You're exactly right. We need to address that, and we can't turn a blind eye to it.
Yeah, I mean, that just seems to me the big problem right now is that even Turkey, which was once a great example of separation of mosque and state, is now under the sway of Erdogan. Indonesia, as we've been talking about, is sliding back into Islamism. So I just wonder, what is the move for Western powers besides talking about this? Where does this come from to turn those countries back on the right path?
Well, we need to do what Al Jazeera is from a small country, Qatar, that's spending billions on advancing their ideas across the world, and that's what creates cauldrons like Turkey. And at the end of the day, if we're going to advance ideas of liberty and defeat growing Islamist hegemonic powers like Turkey, Iran, or Qatar, then we need to advance our ideas. And I think ultimately we've not been involved in that. And like you said, Turkey seems to have had a secular state, but it didn't. They pushed it underground. I would give an example of Iran. If Iran has a revolution that I think is going to come to fruition finally in the next few years, they will never go back to theocracy because they experienced it and they know the oppression that it has. I would remind you that at some point, just like kids growing up, societies have to go through a process of maturing, just like Egypt went through the Brotherhood. Now they'll never go back. Turkey's now going through Iran and through Erdogan and the AKP, and probably won't go back. But that'll need another revolution there, which is scary. So there's going to be some disruption before you have organization, and I think that's too much. We want short-term ADD approach to foreign policy, when in fact we might need a generational approach rather than simply signs of mission accomplished, but looking at a generational like we did in the Cold War, and we're still seeing Cold War 2.0 against Russia, and I think this is a long-term generational conflict against political.
Oh, we lost Zuhdi there. Thank you so much, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. Now, you can read his book.